Yes, welcome back to another episode of Friends from Work, a podcast about all things in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it's a podcast that's hosted by myself, Kyle Sconowell, and my longtime friend from work, Robbie Earl. And turn that music off. Turn the music off. Turn it down. We got to do this, baby. Here we go. Let's go. I'm going to let this go for a teeny bit because we're back, yeah. We are back with Loki, yeah.
I love this. What a way to start a Monday. Friday for us, Monday for whatever day this is. It's a great day for me to start this day. And I hope it's a great way for you, the listener, to start yours.
Man, we are so back, baby. We are back. I have three things I want to talk about before we dive into the specifics of the episode.
Cool.
One really big picture thing here. I texted this on Discord last night right before we started, which, by the way, was just a revelation. I was in there with, I don't know, a few other dozen people, all at like 7:58, all asking like, does it just drop at 8? Like, would you have to reload the app? How does this work? Blah, blah. Like, we didn't know. And then a couple people and I just chimed in and said, this is the best. Like, this is what I wanted it to be. I wanted to be on a Discord all chatting in preparation because we're all watching it at the same time. It's not 2 in the morning. Like, we have never had that, or at least we haven't had that since WandaVision, I think. And it just got me thinking. You actually called me yesterday during the day before this. I had so much fun last night. And it was so life-giving to me to put my daughter to sleep, get some popcorn. We turned off all the lights. My wife and I just sitting on the couch, huge TV, great surround sound, and just turned on a show that we cared about. And it was just so fun to watch it as a fan. I can't emphasize that enough. It was a revelation. It was strange. It really was strange because of the way we've been doing it for so long. And it just got me thinking, I want us to be countercultural in that way. If Friends from Work is known for one thing, I just want it to be known for that kind of life-giving, that joy that we get there. I have no desire to jump on here and right away, the second it's over, start critiquing what didn't work. I don't know if this person, did a very good job. Like, it was so refreshing for me to be in a different mindset of not having to do that. And I'm really wrestling with what that means today because obviously we have to be critical at times and there will be things that I don't love or don't pull me all the way in. And so what do I do on those days if we're the podcast that's only bringing joy? But it's like, I just had so much fun that reading anything about even giving the episode a grade felt so draining to me last night. And I'm just in the middle of a mindset shift for the entire podcast right now. And I want our listeners, I want our community to be a part of that. Like, I'm so tired of the way the last year burned people out, and the entire community, not just us, but every person involved in this fandom is a part of that. And part of that is we need to get our minds shifted back toward just being fans of things that we love. And not immediately having to have a platform or be critical about things you don't love. And I'm wrestling with what that means. But I'm excited to be here today. I know that.
I do think, and I was thinking this yesterday because I was going back and rewatching I actually had to drop off midway through our Loki rewatch last week, which was at the same time when we watched the finale and prep for this. And so I didn't get to watch that with everybody. And so I went back and watched the end of the finale right before the first episode of season 2, which was really perfect because it was great to get that big like exposition dump from He Who Remains again. And as we'll talk about in a second, I mean, it's crazy how much the season 2 opening is just picking up right where the finale, like literally the same exact shot, just from a different angle, but the same statue. But I was going back through and watching it, and I was just thinking, man, I do remember how I felt when this first season was coming out. And I remember how many people were texting me that weren't just like mega MCU fans, just people that were listening to the podcast that were friends of ours. And like, it was just, it was clearly a cultural moment in the way that not many Disney Plus shows have been,
right?
Period. Outside of like a handful of Star Wars shows and a handful of Marvel shows. And I think one thing that I'm excited about now is in the same way that we used to talk about, okay, you know, we got to give them a little bit of runway here post COVID before we start seeing the effects of the pandemic ending. Like, just because we are now back at it, we're still watching shows that had their production going on during the either pandemic or post-pandemic periods. I think now we're in that spot where, like, in terms of not the quality of the shows, but the way that we interact with them, I think there's going to be a bit of a delay there from them making the call to slow down, and people kind of slowly getting back into the mindset of there are a couple of MCU things a year. Each one is a big deal. Each one's an event. Each one deserves like a level of attention and interest and intrigue. And I think I was feeling that yesterday in large part because of the time change, like we were talking about. And that made me happy because it is something that we've been calling for since the first Loki season swapped the drops from being a Friday to a Wednesday.
The time change and the fact that there's only been 2 shows this year. You're right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that like it's encouraging to me because it feels like for a while there was this kind of, has Marvel lost a bit of its luster conversation going on, and we weighed in on that a bit, not as much as I think we were invited to. But if this show, like if the primetime slot does kind of just give more people an opportunity to watch, if just the quality is as high as it was last season, as I think it was this episode, like I think that there is an opportunity for people that maybe haven't even really watched any Disney Plus show or any Marvel Disney Plus shows since Loki season 1, which I think is kind of a lot of people. I think like maybe this is the chance for a lot of folks to come back and get really pumped. And as we're, you know, moving forward, and like we'll talk about, you know, everything I've seen interview wise, it seems like this is also a series that's supposed to be really integral to the multiverse saga as a whole and kind of making some connections and pushing things forward. So my point in this whole diatribe is I feel like a lot of the things that people have been asking Marvel to do that we have pointed out at different points we would like to see Marvel do, it seems like a lot of those are kind of converging right now with season 2 of Loki. And that makes me really excited.
Yep.
Because it feels like there's some nice momentum that I've been missing.
We are going to be here on Friends from Work talking about it weekly. And that's what our podcast is about. So if you're just finding us, we'd love to have you along for the journey. We are trying to cultivate that kind of community, culture, and discussion around these shows and films, things that we love, and just, create a safe and fun environment to discuss those projects. So if you're just finding us, please rate, review, and subscribe and join along for the journey. My last tangent before we get into the specifics of Loki, and this has nothing to do with Loki at all, Spider-Man 2, the video game, is coming out in less than 2 weeks. And I don't know how many opportunities, that's another play the music, but I don't know how many other opportunities I'm going to have to talk about this. You and I love that video game so much. And there's such a unique thing about spending 40 to 50 hours, sometimes 100 hours in a game as a character, like you and I both did in 2017, 18, and 19.
And 20 and 21 and 22.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. But you feel like you're Peter after a while, and you start feeling for how stuff goes with Aunt May and when you meet Miles. And anyways, I am just beyond excited to be back in that universe. And it just so happens that it's releasing on my birthday, October 20. So I have it pre-ordered. It's
I didn't realize that was the exact release date.
Exact release date.
I had like 24 in my head for some reason. So I gained 4 days.
You just gained 4 days. You're only 14 or 13 days away now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be so fun to be back in that elite story and world building game. And I just want to say real quickly, I've been struggling with how to stream it live on YouTube in an effective way, but also timely way. And I figured out a little streaming setup from my house, not my studio, like you're seeing right here.
Oh, yeah.
Why does that matter? Because that means all these evenings that I just go to play the game, I can stream it. So I'm stoked about that because I really love the live stream stuff, like chatting about the game while it's happening. It's also going to be my first time ever playing it. So you're going to get a genuine reaction, and all of that is going to be on YouTube. Every single time I sit down to play, I will hit stream as long as my internet holds up wherever I'm at. And I just got really stoked about that. So while Loki's going on, while we're building towards the Marvels, in the middle of that, Spider-Man 2 releases on my birthday. It's just going to, again, October's the best month of the year. I say it every time. I just love it so much. So anyways, great time to be alive if you're a fan of some of these things.
Man, I know you're going to see Samwaz's head poking in and out of the corner there.
I love it. I love it. All right, let's get into Loki Season 2, Episode 1, after a quick word from these sponsors. So that's basically where I wanted to start. I wanted to hit the big picture of how I'm trying to view this show. On a much more micro level, I loved it. I don't know. I loved it. I feel like it was the vibe of season 1, but with everybody settled into their roles and with a touch of Moon Knight, which I loved, vibe to it. Some of the camera angles, the Easter egg of Casey listening to the same trying to fall asleep audio in his headphones that Moon Knight does, which is a fun little...
Oh, wow. But I didn't make that connection, but yeah.
Some of the fun, like the camera work was even different than it was in season 1, and it's more my scene than even season 1 was. I don't know. I am basically just judging so much of this on what is my initial emotional reaction to the entire vibe that has been created. And for whatever reason, last night, I was literally on the edge of my seat. Something about the pacing, the music from Natalie Holt, the cinematography, the acting, I was fully bought in. So if that's my measure, I could not have been more bought in. And I gotta say one other thing. You said this last week. That's a marvel in and of itself because I was not that stoked for Loki season 1 when it was initially announced. Just because, we didn't want it to mess up the Infinity Saga and diminish that old storyline that we loved with Loki, etc. And so the fact that they have now gotten me from, I don't know if I'm into this show, to what I felt last night is magnificent.
Yeah. I mean, I was so happy with the quality, which was, the big, again, it's like that was the big question going into Marvel movies for so long was like, oh my gosh, like, are they going to be able to keep up this level of quality that they've had?
Didn't it feel like Severance almost last night or something?
Yeah, no, I actually thought about that. I mean, which, rewatching Moon Knight recently, you're right. Like, especially from that directing team, like when you watch episode 4 of Moon Knight, it's like, that's one of the episodes that I think really stands out from all of the Disney Plus stuff again. In the way it captures this, like, it's like a cinematic vibe, but in a way that feels relevant.
Yes.
In the like TV space, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Like, I think that's one thing that that we've so we're going to be talking to the authors of a new book, The Unauthorized Story of Marvel Studios, that I've been reading in preparation for that. And one thing that they talk about in the context of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they point out that is a show that, and I think you and I said this at the time, it's trying to to break up a Captain America movie across
Right.
6 episodes. And there are moments of that are really cool. Like I think that the scene with John Walker fighting Bucky and
Sure.
Sam at the same time, like that feels very Civil War and, helped by Henry Jackman's theme. But it's like, yeah, it that also makes certain moments in that show feel a little strange because it's like the pacing is off. And I think that one thing that Moon Knight did really well and Loki did really well in season 1 is find these kind of like cinematic moments that feel also classic TV.
Yeah.
And so that's why I do love having this team here. And you're right. Like I love how much time we spent in the TVA building in episode 1.
Yes.
Like it's
world
like
building inside
Yeah.
the TVA. We got to see way more of it, which is. Did you ever watch Silo?
I didn't. And someone else the other day was just recommending it.
Okay. Well, that's kind of what this felt like, where you get to see a lot more layers to the entire building, like going way in the basement, down the elevator,
Right.
which I loved. Because
Yeah.
while season 1 did an incredible job of building those sets originally, and they did, wow. It's fun to see that expanded on so that it feels even more tangible and bigger.
Well, because that was one, I think you and I talked about this at some point as well early on, but yeah, you get that one shot at the beginning or midway through the first episode of season 1 where Loki's looking out at the TVA.
Yes.
And he and Mobius are talking about it, and that's when he says the burn it to the ground thing. But like, that's really the most we ever get is just shots of like, from far away. And we
Right.
still didn't get a ton here.
No.
But like seeing the flying car
Yes.
and like,
I thought
all
it was
of
fun
that-
to actually go in the car and see,
Yeah,
there are
yeah.
people out there doing stuff. It's not just like a animated
Right.
background,
And to kind of, well, I don't want to derail you if you have another larger point, but one thing just thinking about the car moment that I liked when you're talking about like people being more settled in from an acting perspective, also kind of from a character perspective, one small moment that I really appreciated is how much Loki, like even with all of the development we've seen from that character across season 1 and him kind of becoming more comfortable with his actual motivations and who he is and not having to posture, like even
Right.
with all that,
Right.
he's not a hero. So when that person that was driving the car ostensibly falls to her death, he just he's not all that bothered.
She'll
And
be
I
okay.
kind of appreciate that. Like, I kind of appreciate that because it is like, I think back to some of my issues with season 1 Loki, and there were times where I was just like, I'm not sure that this is like, he seems a little too
Right.
like this is a little like it's clear that this is a Tom Hiddleston that has spent time on set with Taika Waititi, and I love that. But like if we're talking about like the context of this story, it's not totally, like we didn't have Loki that was this kind of goofy at this stage, and I like that was also toned down a tad in this episode, I thought.
Yep.
But I just little moments like that I kind of stood out to me.
Well, yes, that probably could come back to the direction a little bit too, which by the way, we talked about the directors. I just need to say it's actually Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. And the reason I'm highlighting that is because they specifically directed or wrote and directed? Shoot. They directed, I think, episode 4 of
Yeah, I
Moon
think
Knight,
just directed.
which is one of the best things Marvel has made. And so I love that, first of all, Marvel Studios is leaning into the correct decisions, in my opinion, which is like they watched all this stuff get made and they go, that's the thing I want to, replicate. And did you not get that vibe? Like there's a shot where Loki's walking through a TVA hallway, but the power is flickering. So it's getting dark and he's doing the time skipping. And it very much felt like the hallway shot from a Moon Knight show.
Yeah, no, totally.
So anyways, but some of the lack of Loki's goofiness probably could be from them. But also, I think you're just right that the further we get away from Loki having to deal with his Infinity Saga past, the more comfortable he's going to be. And so I like that we're now starting in a place where we don't have to have that same question of like, oh, would the old Loki have done that or
Right,
whatever? Well,
right.
it's been long enough now. He's had enough development that he can just kind of settle into this version. And this version, I love. They have never, in my opinion, done the buddy cop thing better. Like, this is the perfect blend of almost, it's not creepy, but it's almost like a thriller. Like the shot with the phone, the shot of the temporal aura door, like how long they linger on that and zoom, it feels more like, a thriller. I don't know how to explain it. But just the right amount of humor. I mean, we laughed really hard at a couple things. The way Owen Wilson is able to deliver some of the lines about, no, you know what? It looks horrible, and I can't look at it anymore. And then they pan
It looks like you're being born and dying.
At the same time, I don't even know. And then it pans to the person working the elevator who's just like, what the? and dude, there was just a lot, like the skin question mark thing made me laugh. OB. Like some great OB moments.
Those moments with him and Mobius where it's like, oh yeah, I remember because I got off on the wrong floor and then I hung around for a little bit. He was like, oh no, you left immediately.
Yeah, that was so funny. And Loki's looking at him like, oh really? He's like, it's been 400 years. That's right, 400. It feels like 1,000. Dude, I don't know. It's my humor. It's my pacing. It's my thrillerness. It's my wanting to know desperately what's going to happen. And now finally, it feels like it's also the connectedness we've been missing with how, dude, if we were worried about, I know this is so scatterbrained. Sorry. I'm just so excited. If we were worried about how connected are they going to make Kang, it sure feels like they're not shying away from it.
Oh, I mean, that's what I was, literally the first shot is like it's very clearly, and then we get so many Jonathan Major faces.
Yes, I have chills.
The voice recording between, so cool. Like I guess He Who Remains and Renslayer. I don't know if we would even consider that to be He Who Remains.
A tiny little bit of background there with Ravonna, a little bit of answers, I guess. Yeah,
man. Well, okay, so I also want to talk about.
There's so much. I love it. I love it.
And we'll bounce around here, I'm sure. But one thing that I know had been thrown around moving into this season is the TVA that Loki is in at the end of the season 1 finale. Is that a reset TVA, or is that just the past version, which I had never even really thought about as an option, because they had always talked about the TVA being outside of time, which is, I think, what my response was when Greg brought that up. I was like, yeah, but the TVA is outside of time, so how can you travel back? And I love that, one, that theory was totally right, and two, they addressed that really head on, at least in, like, that's really the whole crux of the first episode. And I also love something that we talked about a lot in WandaVision, that a lot of the questions that we had coming into this from the trailer have already kind of been addressed. So it's like, now we just, it's this like, we don't know what's going to happen, instead of this like, well, we know we're going to get Loki time slipping at some point.
We basically got the trailer here in the first episode.
Yeah.
Which is so great.
I always love that.
I also really appreciate the tongue-in-cheek nature of the time travel. Like, the show understands that it's ridiculous and confusing. Anytime you get into time travel and multiverses, it gets weird for our brains to comprehend. And I love that they kind of just played into that. The entire editing and sequence of the different timelines, like, it was so cool to watch OB and Mobius having the conversation that he's quote unquote remembering, but it's happening for Loki in his present.
Right.
And so he's like, no, I didn't do, you know what? I do have that here actually somehow. I thought that was funny. I thought it was thrilling.
Right.
And then one of the coolest reveals to me was Loki walking into that war room, seeing the statues, and then it edits immediately a hard cut to the present day TVA where it's a wall, like a mural covering it up, a la like Ragnarok, you know, with Hela. And that reveal was awesome. So I thought the editing of even how they did the time stuff was cool. I was so in, if you can't tell. And just on that note, I was also just obsessed with the panic, the way Tom Hiddleston acted the panic of the situation. I appreciated him repeating multiple times to Mobius, like what's going on, because it is confusing, not just for me, but I'm saying
Right.
like if the show was real, those characters would be really confused. Like think about what Mobius is even hearing for the first time, right? Like, what, you found a man behind there? What happened to the giant smoke monster, he says, or whatever? You know, did you kill that thing? Well, there was a guy behind it. Doesn't matter. He's going to ruin everything. He's coming back. And then Loki voicing the exact concern we have with the decision, which is like, I mean, maybe he's telling the truth, but he might not be. And if he's not, then a bunch of bad people are coming and it's the devil. Would you kill the devil? I don't know. Like that whole thing, I don't know. The buddy cop, the way they're performing it and the way it's written was like a 10 out of 10 for me. I'm so excited.
Oh, totally. And it feels like I think about this a lot in comics and TV. And, you know, I think Feige has not been shy about the analog that he sees between comics and TV as he's doing these Disney Plus shows and the kind of storytelling rhythms. And one thing that I always notice is when a run will come to a close and then the next one picks up, normally with a different creative team, I think it is pretty similar to like a new season like this, which is the first time that we've gotten that, obviously, in the MCU. But I feel like there are two major, you know, like really, really high level approaches that a creative team can take to a follow-up, again, like a season 2 or a next series or whatever. And one is this like big mystery box, like we left the character here, but now they're here. And how on earth did they get here? We're going to spend either the entire series or the next few, like answering those questions bit by bit, and you're never going to know what's going on. And that is a compelling thing. It's very like Lost-esque, and it's something that definitely like can cause you to lean in to an extent, but it can also be kind of exhausting and a little frustrating if you're just wanting to follow the story linearly. And that's why I really appreciated the decision to just pick up right where they left. Like the only big, like, how did this happen is the time slipping. Like we still don't, like there are a lot of questions we have, obviously, in terms of like, where are the Kang variants? What's the deal with Ravonna? Where did she go? Like, what does this recording mean? Like, there are still really fun mysteries, but I like that we're just following the same story. That I also love the decision to make the TVA that Loki went to be in the past rather than like a new one, because I didn't want to see him like reforge a relationship with Mobius, and like that would have been exhausting. Like there were just so many kind of streamlining calls that were made here that I really appreciate. Not to mention the little hints of that were cool. Like the fact that it shows Mobius right skin ? And then that's the telling sign for Loki that, oh, I'm in the future. Or the ball falling and cracking the floor and the logo. And then that's how he knows he's in the future, which, by the way, what a sick logo. Have we seen that before? The mask with the sword. I loved it. Oh, yeah. No, I thought that too. But like, yeah, the way they executed that, and I'm totally with you. I think a time traveling TVA is so much better than multiple TVAs, multiple versions of it. But that also means that at some point in the past, at the end of season 1, the TVA had structures and statues of Kang that they then somewhere in there covered up with timekeepers. So the timekeeper thing was a intentional decision somewhere in the arc of the TVA that they're like, you know what, this doesn't work that it's one guy. Let's wipe everyone's brain and tell them it's 3 lizards. So here's a question I have that I was actually thinking as I was watching the finale last night. There is, and I don't even know if I noticed this initially. I'd forgotten it until I read Greg's write-up on the finale, which I would really recommend even now people go back and read those write-ups, because he was really good at picking out certain Easter eggs. You can get that for free on our Substack, where you can get actually a lot of things free if you just want some extra content in written form. Most notably our newsletter, which has really been kind of beefing up as it goes. So if you're wanting to know kind of what's going on with us and the MCU, we do recommend that.
So we have Friends from Work Plus, which is paid, where you can get bonus content of this podcast. But yes, even if you don't want to do that, you can sign up for the free newsletter and get some of this written stuff. And Greg does a great job. You do a great job. It's been a fun way to connect. But yes, you were watching that and reflecting.
Yes, and he highlighted that there was a broken statue in the Citadel of Time whenever Loki and Sylvie come in, that there are statues of the timekeepers, and then there's a fourth one that's crumbled or looks like it's been knocked down. And I had totally forgotten that. And so then I was wondering, kind of moving through the finale, okay, is that supposed to be He Who Remains? And if so, why? Like, why knock down a statue, and also why leave the rubble in that way? Although I guess he's kind of crazy at that point, so who knows? But then I was thinking about that, now seeing all these statues that did exist, now that we've seen the past, do you think that's what that was? Do you think that was supposed to be a statue that then was demolished and he put up these other three? Was there a time when they were all four up? I know this is a weirdly specific question, but
okay. I don't think it's insignificant at all. Look, at this point, you already know that I loved the episode, so I'm going to put that part aside. I just want to close the episode out today with just the questions, the lingering questions we got from this first episode. And yeah, let's talk about the theory you called me about yesterday, which is that in Quantum Mania, you see the Council of Kangs, and there's 3 variants of Kang. Thank you for texting me this, by the way. And one of them says, so the exiled one is dead. Another variant says, you sure he's dead? And then the first one says, if it wasn't true, I wouldn't call you. And then the other one responds with, must really eat you up that you're not the one who killed him. And then Immortus says, none of us killed him. They did. They're beginning to touch the multiverse, and if we let them, they will take everything we've built. So let's stop wasting time. And I think that's important because when we first saw that, I feel like it's fair to say that most people assumed he was talking about Kang the Conqueror from Ant-Man.
Right.
But this theory you told me about yesterday makes so much sense. What if he was actually talking about He Who Remains? Mm-hmm. And hear me out on this. If he was talking about Kang the Conqueror, why would one of the variants be burned up that he didn't kill him? Could he not have just killed him when they banished him?
Right.
That would make so much sense. Also, if you rewatch Quantumania, I'm fairly certain Kang the Conqueror is not dead. He kind of shrivels into a portal, a la Darren Cross from the first Ant-Man.
Right.
It doesn't look like he died there. So to be so certain that the exiled one is dead, I don't know if that's the case. And could it be that Kang the Conqueror is more powerful, but He Who Remains is the person that is preventing them from even having those conversations because he's pruning all the branches? So that's who they ultimately would have to stop. And that's one of the biggest questions I have from season 2, episode 1. What does it even look like? We've gotten this setup, this dread is building, and I'm feeling it so much. And I love it. But what does it even look like for these Kang variants to all show up? Are they all trying to get to the TVA? Are all of them trying to get back to Sylvie now?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, I was thinking about this. What is the significance of He Who Remains dying in terms of the impact on the multiverse? And here's why I'm asking it that way. The option that's given to Sylvie and Loki is you can either take over and everything keeps going, or you can kill me and all my variants come back. And if you think about that, it seems like there could be a third option where they kill him and then also take over. But that's not an option that's given to them, which makes me think that if He Who Remains dies, necessarily all of this will start over again. And is that because if he dies now, it's the loop, not a loop, I guess, but the clock starts again. And now this version of, because he says I'll be right back here again. Not just my variants, he implies like I will wind up as the head of the TVA again in the same place, so I don't really care. But that's why he was like, I want to give it to y'all, and I guess ostensibly just go off the map and not have to deal with it. But I think
my gut tells me it is the third option. That there is a world where they could have killed him. I mean, I understand why he wouldn't suggest that.
Sure,
but that they could have killed him.
But he's got no issue being killed is the thing. So it's not like I don't know that he would be.
I think like it's partially in conjunction with what he knows that means for the TVA if you decide to kill him. Because if you decide to kill him, he likely knows that means you're not interested in running the TVA. Right? That's probably what he means. So that like if you're not interested in running it, then the branches will start going out of control. Like it's almost in conjunction with what Mobius is doing. Like even if he was dead, wouldn't the TVA, if Mobius wasn't there, still just keep pruning as normal? Right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Well, because the option that he gives them is return to the TVA as its benevolent rulers, and you can tell everyone the truth and who they are and where they come from and why we do what we do. So I feel like had they never, like even had Loki never returned, and if, see, this is where it just gets confusing to me because why? So there's the point where they're sitting there and he remains, says the I fibbed line, and now I don't know what's going to happen. Like we've crossed that threshold. And I think that part of this boils down to why it is that they've crossed that threshold. Like, is that because he has decided that he wants Loki and Sylvie to take over, and therefore he's just set an end date at which point he's no longer going to be responsible for pruning or really take any role in the establishing of the sacred timeline? And so that's just this, like, was it an arbitrary cutoff point and a self-imposed cutoff point? Or is there some other reason why that was the extent of his foresight?
Yeah, like what happened at that exact moment if it wasn't a predetermined moment?
Right. And like, if they had taken him up on the offer, it was already branching. So would they have just been like, okay, well, we've got to like jump in and prune these things and just kind of keep it going, I guess? But then how would... Like there are so many like logistic questions to me that it's not that I'm that concerned in getting into the weeds of all of it. I'm just trying to figure out how it all functions, because
for sure,
like why is it that because he died, he specifically, like,
my only question there is that intentional or is that a misstep by them? Like, do you think that the writers have an actual moment in their mind or an answer to that question you just asked? Or are they just going to kind of avoid it and then it's a hole that people like us are left discussing? You know what I mean?
It could be both in that, like, it could be that they had something in mind and they're going to just be showing that in season 2, but it could also be that they didn't, Waldron and his team didn't, but now like Eric Martin and his team, who we should note, Eric Martin wrote this episode. He's kind of taking the Waldron role in season 2. He also wrote on season 1, specifically episode 4, although he may have written on others as well. But I could see them just sort of running with it and doing their own thing. But I think that they have to address in some way the how of the King variants, because that's like the big question, I think, at this point within the MCU. Like, if there's one big question out there, it's like, what's going on with King the Conqueror, in the same way that, around the time we were wrapping like phase 2, we were like, what's going on with Thanos? That's at least the idea, I think. I
would like to believe, I could be wrong on this, that when they were making the finale of season 1, everybody involved, including all the higher-ups at Marvel Studios, realized the importance of what they were doing. Like, okay, if we're going to be doing the multiverse phase, like, we better get this correct because this is a scene that is going to come back. Like that, I'm hoping that wasn't done willy-nilly by just a team of writers that were not really involved. And then Kevin was like, oh, that's cool. And that was it. You know, I'm hoping there was kind of like okay, if we're going to end the show with this, we better make sure everything you just said, is true.
I think that that's right, because everything I've seen from interviews, like they always knew where they wanted to go with season 2. It's apparently, which again, I think you can read in the water cooler from last week's newsletter. But this is apparently the only Marvel project ever that has had 0 reshoots. I don't know if you saw that.
No.
That's never happened before. Marvel's kind of famous or infamous for their reshoots, in part because I think they'll let the writers keep working on it like really far into the game. And so sometimes they'll change things up.
Maybe that's a positive sign. Who knows?
No, I mean, I think it is here because apparently they were just like, we knew what we wanted to make. We made it A+ done. One thing, though, before we kind of get off the what happened with He Who Remains point, because I'm sure we'll get more insight into that as we go. I also watched beforehand the Legends episodes.
Okay.
Connected to Loki, which again, by the way, is such a, like, that's a telling thing, because I have not watched one of those in a long time. Like, I think the last ones that I watched were from like early phase 4.
You mean where you're at vibe wise?
Right.
Yeah.
Like where I was like, I'm excited to like see, because I, in the same way that like whenever they came out for like WandaVision, it was like, oh, like what are they going to highlight? Like what?
Yeah,
and I wanted to like pick it apart and see what was. And I felt that way last night about Loki season 2. Like I was like, I want to see how they are going to catch people up and explain what's been going on, because I feel like that's going to be telling. And it was, especially in the variants episode. So if you're listening to this, it's like a 4-minute thing, but it goes through some of like how incursions are supposed to work, and it gives you scenes from Multiverse of Madness and scenes from Quantumania, which I thought was telling. And one scene that I thought was particularly telling, because there's some debate around how the sacred timeline has functioned, and whether basically,
by the way, looked really sick when they showed the actual machine raveling it up. That was cool.
Yeah, that was cool. But like the question about, is this Kang, or is this He Who Remains just isolating this timeline and keeping other timelines from touching it? And that's what the branches are? Or is it in fact how I had initially taken it, he has destroyed all the other timelines and this is the only one, as long as he's doing the pruning? And I think if we, unless it's a bait and switch, the Variants Legends episode seems to make it clear that it is in fact He Who Remains has prevented his variants from ever having existed as long as he's pruning. And
so it's not the touching one, it's that he's getting rid of them entirely. I
think so. And now again, that opens up a lot of other questions. But the reason I think that, it was the way that they show that, and I'm always so impressed with the editing in those, whoever they have putting those together, with like finding bits of dialogue and putting them over scenes often from other movies or different parts of movies to kind of connect the dots, I think is always impressive. Only person I know that does a better job is Kyle Sconewell on the friendly reminders.
For some reason, as soon as you said only person, I'm like, he's turned this back to us.
But anyway, what they do whenever they're talking about He Who Remains variants is they show the flashback in Quantumania of Kang in his armor, just like wiping out all these like women and children, and how just kind of showing his atrocities. And they show that, and then He Who Remains says one of his lines about establishing the sacred timeline and pruning these branches, and it shows the same scene in reverse, like it's rewinding, and it rewinds back to like nothingness, implying that after He Who Remains did what he did, he undid all of the stuff that his variants had ever done, because they never existed to do it in the first place. Which is kind of a big, like a I don't know, to me, a big answer at this stage of kind of how that functioned or is supposed to have functioned.
Yeah, that's so wild, because then that puts the focus on what B-52 kept talking about in this episode. You know, B-52 is so set on, we cannot prune the branches because you're ruining, you're destroying millions and billions of lives. But there's a moral question to that too, because what you're talking about is, if it just kind of undoes it, like, do those people even exist then? Would you rather those branches exist and then have those atrocities committed?
It's
kind of back to Eternals a little bit too.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Hey, shout out our rewatch, The Order there.
True. Yeah.
I feel prepped now.
I like that they are, at least in this first episode, moving us to a different kind of philosophical quandary. Like the one in season 1 was very much the free will versus determinism. And that's still obviously going to be a part of this and is a part of like this other question too. But I like that now it's getting, to kind of that same tension of like it's this chaos order theme that's still running through it, but you see it showing up in presenting itself in different ways.
Absolutely. I don't think we're going to have answers on some of those big questions for a little bit yet, especially since this is all culminating, hopefully, in a Kang Dynasty and or Secret Wars film. So this part of it will not be resolved by the end of the show. I can't wait to see where that goes. I'm fully bought in at this point. This episode was a let's freaking go for me. I want to close the episode today by highlighting just the small questions that are left.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what in the world was going on with that phone? Who was calling? Why was that getting Loki's attention so intensely? Like, Loki looked down at his timer and he knew he had like 5 minutes, and I was so frustrated. I'm like, why are you walking and giving up? You got to find a pruning stick immediately. Why? Like, what did he see or hear that caused him to give up? Now, I know that he then saw Sylvie, which probably froze him for a second, because for a second he probably thought, well, I could just stay here or whatever with Sylvie. But why was the phone ringing? Who's calling? Like, who knows that that's the moment to call? And then who pruned Loki? Like, that stick was hitting him from the back. He was surprised by it. It wasn't him doing it. So was that someone intentionally pruning him to help? Was that a different version of Loki there to help? Was that like someone who has the grand plan in mind there doing that? Right. Was that another Mobius who is caught on? I don't know. Like, who pruned him? Or was it just a hunter that thought he was a variant and he should be gone? But then what was going on with the TVA in the future? Like, the future TVA is in a rough spot. And
what's the deal with this new hunter and judge that we've had introduced? Like, I guess they're just going to going to be the hardcore fascists of the bunch now. I
guess, but then they said all of this for Sylvie, which kind of intrigues me. Like, is there another layer to it? Are they really sending that many people to go get Sylvie, or are they aware of the Kangness of it and they're assembling a larger army for that or something? You know, like, why include the line, I think twice, all of that for Sylvie? So that's fascinating too. Like, is there more going on there?
Right. Yeah. Because, I mean, what would it wouldn't do anything if they caught Sylvie, which I guess they don't necessarily know. But right, like, she's not.
I guess they. Because
which transitions us to the post-credit scene here, which we have to. I almost forgot to talk about, but that's a big one too.
Which was awesome. They think that Sylvie, I guess, is responsible for all this, and so it's maybe a fascist reaction to that, maybe. I don't know. But then Sylvie, I guess, just chooses a random spot on the timeline, I guess. But by the way, did you notice the coolest little thing? First time we ever saw this, it said branch timeline.
Oh,
so
that's
it said,
right.
Like, what was the year? It said 1982, I want to say, Oklahoma.
82 or 83.
But then it says,
and it is in Broxton, Oklahoma, which is either just an Easter egg or a sign of something to come. I think probably just the former, but that is where New Asgard exists in the comics whenever Asgard gets moved to Earth.
Oh.
So instead of it being in Norway, it's in Oklahoma.
MCU Asgard clearly does not exist in Oklahoma, right? We're in agreement there. Okay.
Unless in this branch.
Yeah. Oklahoma has separated from the center of the country and is floating on the coast. But I thought it was cool they included branch timeline. We've never seen that. So she now is officially in the multiverse somewhere else.
Right.
Gosh, I love it. I love that I have so many questions with that.
Because and that's just virtue of her not being hunted anymore, right? Like, well, or I guess she thinks she's not being hunted anymore, but now she is being hunted again. But right, like that's the whole reason why she's like, I'm just going to go somewhere that I want to go that's not an apocalyptic event.
I mean, that was the whole point of her stabbing He Who Remains, right? She thought, I'm going to kill him and just get rid of this TVA nonsense. They're going to stop pruning all these branches and my mission is now done, a la Thanos. Like, I can now do whatever I want because no one's predetermining where it's going. So I now can exist in any timeline and do anything. That's why she says, I'll do all of it. I'll have all of it. She's been running her whole life from this predetermined path. So now she has free will of just wherever I want to go. I think that's the point of it. But she probably doesn't know, like, yeah. That could be a sick twist in all this too, is that like somehow because of Kang, it still ends up with a predetermined thing by the end of this, you know?
I mean, that the big question that I have is still what, and I need to rewatch it, and I'm going to before the second episode, but what timeline is the TVA a part of now? Like,
it's not,
because
it's removed from time. It's like,
but it's not because
there's a past and a future and a
right. So like, if there's a past and a future within the TVA,
its own thing, maybe,
or it's an extension of the sacred timeline.
And
because that's the timeline that He Who Remains comes from, right? So it would kind of be part of, like, if he set it up.
Do those people ever age or die?
Apparently not. And he didn't. But they do have a past, like in intangible records of the past, like things that were made that existed and then have like consequences now, like cracks. And I think that that's a new development, it seems like. But maybe not, because I don't know, like they had the, like, talking about the multiple mind wipes, like, and those, like, I like that question because I feel like it's going to be answered. Like, that doesn't feel like something that is going to still be left dangling at the end of the season. It could be, but one final thing that I keep thinking about as we're talking about like the various Kangs and how that will all play out. I keep thinking about Kang's line in Quantumania about all the Avengers that he's killed, and he asks, which one are you? Are you the one with the hammer? And there's like the whole little bit with him and Scott Lang. But the implication there is that he has killed so many iterations of the Avengers, which means that his conquering, right, is him going from universe to universe. And like, I guess that's what the multiversal war looked like, is like them trying to take over each variant, trying to take over as many universes as they could, or at least the conquering variants. And I'm just wondering, the incursions, like he also says in Quantumania, like my variants treat the multiverse. It's something like they play with it like it's a game or like it's a toy.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then he says, so, endless incursions. And then basically kind of the same thing that He Who Remains says, which is, luckily, I came in and put it into it. And Kang the Conqueror kind of has the same, like, luckily I was willing to come in and put it into it. They just do it in different ways. But I'm just wondering what the connection is between this multiversal war and the incursions that we're now seeing in Multiverse of Madness, and the way that those are spurred by variants from another timeline spending too much time or dealing too much with an alternate timeline like we got with Strange there, and how much is caused by this like is it any time that they touch like there's going to be an incursion, or is it because of something that the Kings are doing? Like, would that have even been possible? Like, would an incursion have even existed prior to He Who Remains or other King variants first meeting each other in kind of the origin story that He Who Remains tells us? Like, I have answers for a lot of these things from the comic side, but a lot of those just, I don't think apply here because the MCU is creating its own, like, admittedly confused, like, basis for the multiverse and time travel. And I don't know. Like, I'm these are all the things that are bouncing around as I'm trying to make sense of, of the rules.
Those are all good questions. I don't have answers for you. It is admittedly so complex, so much more complex than the Infinity Saga, which was how can we place these MacGuffins and have somebody come along and try to collect them all. So it was just all so linear. This is a very complicated thing to navigate, one that we've talked about for years now being complicated to navigate. So really all I can do is emotionally respond to said episode and what they're telling me, but all those questions are still out there and I have no idea. I don't know.
Oh, and I don't
know I don't know how much they've thought about it before Multiverse of Madness and this, etc.
I mean, I have to
they would have needed like Kip Thorne or some physicist to come in and be like, okay, here's how it all works before you start. You know, I don't know.
But it is, you know, like Waldron, when we talked to him during the first season of Loki, and he was, you know, they were finishing up Multiverse of Madness at the time. He talked about how much work had gone into like the explanation put forward in Endgame and how to kind of extract that and make it make sense moving forward, but also evolve with the kind of new status quo. And then the fact that Waldron, did write both projects like Loki and Multiverse of Madness, and that Jeff Loveness, whenever he came on the show, talked about how, you know, he would consult Waldron whenever he was writing Quantumania, because at least at the time, they were both also working on King Dynasty and Secret Wars. That all makes me think that there is a rhyme and reason to all of it. Like, I don't think that it's just scattershot, like, you know, we'll just make it up as we go. Maybe it is, but I feel like having the same, like, I have to imagine that was Kevin Feige's intent in putting the same writers on these projects to kind of keep some coherent vision.
I hope so. And I think so too.
I do too. And which is why those questions are not annoying or discouraging to me. They're encouraging because
I like thinking about it.
Yeah. I'm eager to see what they, you know, if we get all the way to the end of the Multiverse Saga and there's still things that just don't make sense or contradict each other, I'll be at that point bummed. But I think that they've got a long way to go before I'm going to really expect any sort of answers.
You mentioned comics twice, and if you're just finding this podcast, you should know that we get our comics from organicpricedbooks.com. And if you go there and use the promo code FriendsFromWork, all one word, you can save money off a comic that is already discounted over all of its competitors. So check them out. They ship comics directly to you in amazing condition for very low prices that can't be beat. organicpricedbooks.com. As I mentioned multiple times, we're going to be going through every episode of Loki here on Friends from Work each week, and we are excited to have you along for the journey. Thank you so much for listening. Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Check out our YouTube channel, and then we'll be back here talking about Loki Season 2, Episode 2, right back here on Friends from Work.